Hello, this is Ruslan Belov with you. Do you know what Trump said? Trump stated that he hopes for a swift ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. And quote, he said, "I see us making progress." But tell me, do you see any progress being made? I don't either. Well, the fighting continues, the front line lives its own life, and we continue to analyze the situation on the front. Let's open the map. So friends, yesterday CNN published an article stating that Dnipropetrovsk oblast is now a priority target for the Russian army, because capturing any significant territory in a new region where the Russian army has not yet set foot would allow the Kremlin leadership to enter negotiations with additional leverage. This is precisely why, in this sector near Dnipropetrovsk oblast, from Uspennivka to Andriivka, we are now seeing an increased number of attacks. That is, if we look at the entire front and identify where the most attacks are concentrated, it's in this area. Plus, more and more reserves are gradually being pulled here. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine are also constantly transferring reserves to hold the defensive line in front of Dnipropetrovsk oblast. But they're not succeeding. Let's break down each sector near Dnipropetrovsk oblast one by one. And we'll start not with Uspennivka, but even further north, near the urban-type settlement of Udakna. This area may have fallen out of the spotlight, but the border is very close here. Right now, there's noticeable activity in the settlement itself. Let me remind you that the eastern part was already under control, but during their attempted counter-offensives from January to March on the Pokrovsk direction, the AFU managed to push our troops out of the settlement. However, as of now, all positions have been regained. If we switch to this map, it's clearer. See, this entire section is under full Russian control. That's about 300 meters deep into the settlement. The grey zone extends all the way to the center of Udakna. Even from these positions, it's not far to Dnipropetrovsk oblast, about 5 kilometers. If we move further south, the fighting is no longer for Uspennivka. Despite what Ukrainian military experts say, they've lost Uspennivka. The village is under full Russian control. Moreover, attacks are now being launched from Uspennivka toward the next village, Novopavlivka. The eastern part of the village is currently a grey zone. Again, the goal here is also to reach the border of Dnipropetrovsk oblast. Though it's still a bit far, they still have to go through Novoalexandrivka, Novomykolivka, and Muravka. The total distance left to cover is about 10 kilometers. So I wouldn't consider this sector the most immediate prospect for advancement. But further south, yes. There, the AFU is in complete disarray, because there are two sectors where their defense is crumbling. These are the areas around Kotliarivka and the village of Oryovo. In both places, the AFU is losing ground, and in this case, any loss of position is an unforgivable mistake that could cost them a breakthrough by our forces into Dnipropetrovsk oblast. Now let me explain in detail and show you visually. We'll start with the situation around Kotliarivka. Our troops have entered the village, and fighting is ongoing. Though, to be precise, as of the recording of this video, the fighting is still happening. Why am I specifying? Well, because the village is tiny. It's more of a hamlet than a village. Look, there are about a dozen houses, and even those aren't built in a continuous line, they're scattered. That's the entire settlement. Obviously, the fighting here won't last long. Even yesterday, there were reports that the AFU had already been pushed out of Kotliarivka, but I personally haven't been able to confirm this. So, let's be cautious. We'll note that as of the recording of this video, fighting in the village continues. By the time you watch this, the situation may have changed, and there might be confirmation that the village is already under our control. Now, how critical would the loss of Kotliarivka be for the AFU? Extremely critical. Because, look, let's examine the map carefully. Here's Kotliarivka. Beyond the village, there are 2 tree lines, then a ravine, then 2 fields. And that's it. You're in Dnipropetrovsk oblast. Moreover, you can see that south of Kotliarivka, our troops have already advanced toward a water reservoir. From these positions, it's about 3 kilometers to the border. Again, yes, the AFU is constantly throwing reserves here every day, desperately trying to slow down the advance. And let's admit, they are managing to slow it down. But they can't stop it. The front is moving slowly but steadily toward Dnipropetrovsk oblast. Things are also bad for the AFU further south. They lost Bogdanivka a few days ago. Even Ukrainian military experts have had to admit this. But besides Bogdanivka, they've also lost Troitsk, and that's serious, because Troitsk smoothly transitions into Oryovo, and beyond that village, there's just one field, and then the border of another oblast. The distance between the village and the border is literally 1 kilometer. And in general, from the western outskirts of Troitsk, where our troops' positions are now, to the border, it's less than 3 kilometers. Essentially, on this part of the front, it's just a stone's throw away. I think the fighting for Oryovo will begin as early as today. Of course, this village is larger than Kotliarivka and heavily fortified. It won't be taken in a day or two, but by the end of next week, the AFU might lose it. Now the last sector also aimed at Dnipropetrovsk oblast is here, Andriivka, Oleksivka. This one is more complicated because Oleksivka is not like Oryovo or Kotliarivka. It's a large village, but significant forces are now being concentrated here. There have already been attempts to enter Oleksivka, several in fact. So far, the AFU is holding on, repelling assaults. However, yesterday, there was a recorded attempt by Russian assault units to bypass Oleksivka from the north, meaning avoiding getting bogged down in urban combat inside the village. The outcome of this maneuver is still unknown. We'll have to wait for the troops to report back. In any case, losing Oleksivka would be a death sentence for the AFU, because after that, the path into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast would be wide open. As you can see, there are just a couple of hamlets beyond it. Impossible to defend. And then it's already another oblast. So, let's summarize. CNN is, of course, a complete dumpster fire. But in this assessment, they're right. The current focus isn't on capturing Pokrovsk, but on pushing into Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. We'll soon see how that plays out. Ukrainian General Staff claims Russia plans to encircle Sumy. Military observer Yuri Podolyaka reports that the Russian armed forces are preparing an operation to encircle and seize Sumy. This is why holding parts of Kursk Oblast is critical for Ukraine, to disrupt this very operation. However, there's one major problem. In Kursk Oblast, they control only a few square kilometers, not a single village in full. Fighting is already underway for Oleshnya and Gornal, and the front is gradually approaching Sumy. Only 25 kilometers remain to the city's outskirts, and if Russian forces advance just 10 kilometers more, drones will be able to block the city's entry points. Everything is moving in that direction. One of the objectives is to create a full or partial encirclement of Sumy. Russia needs this to establish a buffer zone near its border. Kursk direction, fighting near Gornal and Oleshnya. Russian troops are engaged in combat near Gornal and Oleshnya, the last border settlements still held by the AFU. Overall, Russian units are expanding their control zone around Oleshnya, clearing tree lines used by the AFU for troop rotations. Near Guevo, the AFU launched a counterattack yesterday near the ruins of a former distillery, but failed to break through. Russian forces are finishing clearing the surrounding areas, though extensive demining work remains. On the approaches to Gornal village and the monastery, the AFU has dug in, resisting with artillery, mortar fire and drones. However, Russian crews are actively targeting their positions. Belgorod direction, failed Ukrainian breakthrough attempts. In Belgorod Oblast, the AFU tried multiple times in the past 24 hours to break through toward Popovka. This time, their assault groups were larger, up to 15 fighters each, but this only led to heavier losses. Near Demidovka, the AFU is amassing forces around Miropilska and Petrushevka, Sumy Oblast. Russian forces are striking them with FAB glide bombs. Meanwhile, Russian troops continue clearing operations in the tree lines near Demidovka and Popovka. Novopavlivka direction, Vostok Group sector, Fedorivka Kamyanka. Near Fedorivka, Russian assault groups have entered the southern part of the village. Northeast of Rozdolne, they've expanded control by 4 kilometers in width and 1 kilometer in depth. Assault units are advancing along the eastern bank of the Mokry Yal River, pushing north to outflank the AFU garrison. South of Otradny, there's been progress on sectors 3 to 4 kilometers wide and up to 1 kilometer deep into AFU defenses. Advanced toward Bogatyr, Russian forces continue their offensive toward Bogatyr, expanding their zone of control. Reports indicate a 300-meter advance from Rozliv in Bogatyr's direction. West of Rozdolna, they've taken control of a road leading to Bogatyr and cleared a major AFU stronghold. Near Oleksivka, the zone of control has expanded by 200 meters. Pokrovsk direction, intense fighting continues. The situation remains tense, with fierce clashes near Shevchenko and Lysivka, while things have quieted down near Udachna, Kotlina and Pishchane. Combat activity has significantly decreased in some areas, but heavy fighting persists in key sectors. Shevchenko. Fighting continues in the northeastern, northern and northwestern parts of the settlement. Lysivka. Active combat operations are ongoing. Toretsk direction southwest of Toretsk. Russian forces are advancing near Kalinove. Even Ukrainian sources admit the loss of most of the village, though heights to the north remain under AFU control. Progress near Tarasivka is slow, but there's movement toward the highway from Oleksandropil and Valentinivka. Trump's special envoy arrives in Russia for secret talks. Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary of the Russian president, confirmed that Steve Witkow, a special envoy of U.S. President Donald Trump, flew to Russia yesterday. Effectively, negotiations are taking place between Trump and Putin, just through trusted intermediaries with the highest level of clearance. This was reported by the Telegram channel Legitimny. According to our sources, the agenda covers multiple key issues: Middle East, including the Iran dossier, Ukrainian crisis, China, and Asia-Pacific matters. Lifting the first package of sanctions against Russia. The Americans will be the first to ease restrictions and resume trade. Trump wants to flood Russia with American cars. Other topics include space cooperation, military modernization, nuclear arms control, restoration of air traffic, currently blocked for US and Russian airlines. This is just an approximate list. Almost no one knows the full details. But one thing is certain: all the news about Trump being angry at Putin is pure disinformation. Behind the scenes, high-level negotiations are actively ongoing. Meanwhile, no such talks are happening between the US and Ukraine. Keep watching. US demands Ukraine repay billions, with no security guarantees. The New York Times reports that Ukraine will be forced to repay the US billions of dollars, without any security guarantees as part of the New Deal. Key conditions: Ukraine must reimburse all military and financial aid received over the past 3 years. It must also hand over 50% of profits from natural resource extraction to a US-controlled fund. The US insists on withdrawing all fund revenues until Ukraine repays the full wartime aid amount, plus 4% annual interest. Not a single word about security guarantees for Ukraine. Former US Secretary of State Blinken confirmed in an interview that Zelensky himself offered rare earth metals to the US in exchange for military aid. Closing remarks. Well, I wish you all a great weekend. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and stay tuned.